Hi, everyone. Welcome to 3GNY Stories Live. We do Wednesdays. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Gail Peck, 3GNY Vice President, founding board member, and granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. This is our 27th We Do Wednesday, a virtual series that brings our educational initiative, We Do, from classrooms to your living rooms. I'm proud to share that this event marks 3 years of We Do Wednesdays, and we look forward to many more. 3GNY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of survivors and their supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. We empower 3Gs to share their stories. For tonight's event, we'll be featuring 3GNY volunteer Alyssa Domash, who will share the story of her grandmother, Fela Lesorgen, from Sosnowiec to Skokie, my grandma's journey. Tonight's program showcases 3GNY's flagship educational initiative, We Do, which is short for We Educate. 3GNY is a 4-week training program that empowers grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their family's Holocaust experiences in school classrooms and with community groups. Education is more important and more urgent than ever, given the horrifying rise of anti-Semitism we see in the headlines on a daily basis. We know we need to keep doing this work as much as we possibly can. Studies have shown that students who receive Holocaust education are more tolerant and comfortable with people of different races and backgrounds. They're more willing to challenge incorrect or biased information and are more likely to be upstanders. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of stepping in early and often where small injustices are found, on the playground, in the classroom, and on the street, because it's the easiest and most efficient way to act. By the time the Nazi tanks roll in, it's too late. 3GNY has trained more than 450 speakers in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and around the country. We've spoken in more than 1,000 classrooms and have impacted more than 50,000 students and community members. Between our live programming and YouTube channel, more than 18,000 additional people have heard our stories. Hope is not lost, and we need to keep doing this work, now more than ever. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift. This will go directly toward engaging more speakers in schools, thus reaching even more students with these impactful stories. We do not solicit donations from schools, teachers, or students. We provide our programming to schools completely free, and we aim to keep the cost of training to 3Gs as low as possible. There's a link with ways to donate in the chat, and we hope you'll consider making a gift. If you've already donated to us, thank you so much. You can also sponsor an event or program in honor or in memory of a survivor or loved one, and there are also corporate sponsorship opportunities available. Thank you again for being here tonight. You're helping us honor the memories of our grandparents and ensuring that never again is more than just an empty phrase. I'd now like to call on Jason Rosenbaum, 3GNY volunteer, who will introduce himself and then introduce Alyssa.
Thank you, Gail. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. I'm the grandchild of Miriam and Benjamin Rosenbaum, survivors from Poland. My grandmother, Miriam, is from Sosnowiec, Poland as well, where she grew up with Alyssa's grandmother as first cousins and best friends after the war and for the rest of their lives in Chicago. And my grandfather, Benjamin, was from Czarna, Poland. My grandparents met after being liberated from the concentration camps in Reichenbach, Germany. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to my cousin, Alyssa Domash. Alyssa is the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors as well, and we completed 3GNY's We Do speaker training together in 2022. Alyssa feels fortunate that she was able to hear some of her grandparents' survival stories directly from them as a child, and with the help of 3GNY, has been able to piece her grandmother's survival story together. She is honored to carry on her grandmother's story and keep her legacy alive. Alyssa grew up outside of Chicago and has lived in New York City for the past 5 years. She currently works in market research. I am thrilled that 3GNY has brought me and Alyssa together. We didn't grow up together, considering that she was about 5 years old when I moved to New York City 20 years ago. So sharing our grandparents' story of survival together for 3GNY has given us a relationship that I'm very proud of, and I know our grandparents would be as well. Alyssa, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Gail, and thank you, Jason, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for being here tonight. As Jason said, my name's Alyssa Domash, and I'm the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. But for the sake of our time tonight, I'm going to be focusing on my maternal grandmother, Fela. But before I tell you about my grandma as a Holocaust survivor, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her, about the other parts of her that I gathered from my 13 years with her. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. One second. My grandmother Fela was extremely smart and very quick-witted. She was incredible at sewing, needle pointing, knitting, and the food that she cooked was some of the best I'll ever have, but never done by following a recipe or measuring, and always just feeling and tasting. And besides her desire for cleanliness, begging us to watch the carpet every time we stepped foot near her living room with food, as she didn't want us to spill, she deeply cared about her family. And yes, she was a Holocaust survivor. Growing up, I was always very enamored with my grandparents' Holocaust survival stories. Anytime there was a history project that I got to choose the topic, I would focus on the Holocaust. I think since a young age, I just felt a connection and almost a responsibility to educate not only myself, but others on the terrors of the Holocaust, to preserve the legacy of my grandparents and the lessons we learned from it. So I'm not surprised that when I found 3GNY, I felt the same sense of connection to this organization and the same sense of responsibility to share my grandma's story. While my grandmother did not like being recorded, as you can probably tell from these very blurry pictures, and she very rarely even talked about her experience, throughout mine and my siblings' time that I spent with my grandma, along with conversations with other family members, research I've done myself, and the support of 3GNY, I was able to piece together her story that I'm going to share with you today. My grandma grew up in Sosnowiec, Poland, which is a town right outside of Krakow, with her mother, Regina, her father, Jacob, her sister, Roja, and her brother, Umek. She lived a very comfortable life. Her father was a flour distributor, the only one in her town, and her family was Orthodox Jewish and kept kosher. She had a very happy childhood. Her and her friends loved to play hide and seek, see movies, and loved to listen to the radio. And these are real pictures of her growing up. And at this point in my presentation, and when I go to middle schools and high schools and I tell them this, I really like to say that her childhood probably was not very different than the childhood that they had growing up. That she probably did many of the same things that they did growing up too. And I think this just shows how normal life really was before the war. As she became a young teenager, around 14 years old, her family started to hear rumors of what was to come. Umek, my grandma's brother, who was 7 years older than her, tried to convince her family to leave Poland. They actually were all packed and ready to go, but her mother just couldn't get herself to leave the home. They didn't believe that anything could really get that bad. And I don't blame them. I can't imagine being asked to leave everything that I know based off of rumors. Umek did end up fleeing to the Soviet Union, while the rest of the family stayed. The Germans invaded Sosnowiec in 1939, one of the first towns in Poland occupied by the Nazis. Once they invaded, they immediately burned down the synagogue in the town. Jewish people were terrorized on the streets, and businesses were destroyed, purely because they were Jewish. Eventually, forced relocations into crowded tenements slowly created a ghetto, known as the Sosnowiec Ghetto, where my grandma was forced to live for almost 2 years. As things progressed, often the Germans wouldn't necessarily take families together. They would look for certain age groups. My grandmother had an aunt whose family was already taken from her by the Nazis. So if they heard rumors that Germans were looking for teenagers, My grandma and her cousin Manya would run to their aunt's house to hide because they'd be less likely to check her house since they knew her family was already taken. I'm told that even during this time, my grandma and her cousin were constantly laughing. Even in the darkest and scariest of times, they were still just teenagers doing teenager things, goofing off together. Eventually, in March 1943, my grandma was taken from her family by the Nazis and brought to Waldenburg concentration camp. Waldenburg was part of a network of about 100 concentration camps in Eastern Germany called Gross-Rosen. Altogether, 125,000 prisoners passed through Gross-Rosen, which accounted for about 11% of all total incarcerated prisoners in the Nazi concentration camp system. 40,000 prisoners were murdered there. At Waldenburg, she was forced to work in a textile factory with loud and dangerous machines. And again, at this time, I usually pause and ask and tell the students that my grandma was probably around the same age that they are now when this happened to her. And I just ask them to picture being taken from your family and everything that you know and love and being forced to operate these dangerous machines. And again, I just really want to get them to understand how scary this must have been for her. She was at Waldenburg concentration camp for about 1 year. In March 1944, she was moved to Greenberg concentration camp, another camp within the Gross-Rosen network. From what I can see from my research online, it was a 1,300 all-girl concentration camp. At Greenberg, she was forced to labor as a plumber's assistant. It's hard to say that she was lucky, but this job was actually one of the better ones because it wasn't located inside the concentration camp. So it actually enabled her to leave the concentration camp every day. Greenberg was also actually located next to a French prisoner of war camp. And sometimes the French POWs would throw food over the fence to starving concentration camp prisoners. So some days, my grandma was actually able to get food on her way to work. Truthfully, as I said, my grandma did not like to talk much about her experience in the concentration camps. And much of what I've talked about so far has been piecing together tidbits that I could from the few things that she told us. And like I said, information from other family members or just when I've been able to find online and in documents. However, the one story that my grandma did share is something that happened to her on her birthday, and one that I'll never forget. It was my grandma's birthday, and being enslaved in a concentration camp, I can't imagine she expected the day to be any different than any other day. However, that day, she showed up for her duties, and the plumber's wife had baked a cake for my grandma. I can only imagine how much of a treat this was for her. I imagine the types of food that she was fed, or some days not fed at all. So a home-baked cake must have tasted like heaven. After eating some, my grandma knew that she wanted to share it with her friends back in the concentration camp. However, getting the cake back to her friends was not an easy feat. She would have to sneak it back into the camp. This makes me think about how important friends must have been to her and how truly caring of a person she was. She must have been so hungry and so delighted by this cake, and she knew how much of a risk it was bringing it back to the camp, yet she still wanted to share this happiness with her friends. She decided to hide the cake to bring it back. Now again, this was a big risk. She knew that the Nazis didn't always check the prisoners when coming back into the camp from their off-site jobs. However, as luck had it for her that day, the guards did check her, and they found the cake. She was immediately sent to the head of the camp, where they asked her who gave her the cake. Now she had yet another impossible choice to make. She knew that if she told them it was the plumber, they would kill him. But lying or making the Nazis mad in any form had its own risks too. No matter what she said, there were potentially detrimental outcomes. But my grandma, being the person that she was, decided that risking the plumber's life after him and his wife had been so kind to her on her birthday was not in the cards. So she lied and told the guard that the French POWs threw it over to her. However, they were not quite satisfied with her answer. They could tell that she was lying. As such, the soldier had a very large ring on his hand and punched her right in the face. Now, I can only imagine how painful this experience was. But what I do know is that into her adult life and elderly years, even when I knew her, she continued to get infections from the scars that were caused by this ring, consistently forced to relive this moment over and over again through these infections. After the situation, they weren't going to let my grandma go back and work with the plumber. She had lost the privilege of leaving the camp every day. However, the plumber found out what happened. So he came to the camp and told the soldiers that my grandma was the best worker and that he could not produce without her. Now, this was a lie. Many other people probably could have performed as his assistant. I can't say for sure why he risked his own life that day by lying to the Nazis. I like to think that even in the darkest times, there were just some people that still wanted to do some good. And he saved her life by doing that. I don't know much else about her time in the concentration camps, but I imagine that that is just one very small view into what she experienced. I do know that she was at Greenberg for about 10 months total. My grandma was liberated in 1945, and she decided to go back to her hometown, Sosnowiec, to see who, if any, of her family survived the war. To be honest, I've spoken with a few different family members and have heard a few different stories about where and when my grandmother was reunited with the few remaining family members that she had. Eventually, though, she was reunited with her brother Umek and her cousin Manya. Her sister Roja and both her parents did not survive. What I do know is that her family did not stay in Sosnowiec very long, as not many Jewish people were left there. Think about it. In 1939, 3.3 million Jewish people lived in Poland. At the end of the war, approximately 380,000 Polish Jews remained alive there. I can't imagine remaining in a place that holds so much pain. While she first made her way back to Reichenbach, Germany, she eventually wanted to make her way to Western Germany, as this was a place that was safer, as this was a part of Germany that the Allied forces now controlled. Throughout her journey, she had no way to get around because everything that belonged to them was either stolen or destroyed during the war. Because of this, they were forced to sneak onto trains to get to their destination. I'm told that at one point during this, my grandma had to sit on top of a moving train they snuck onto, and her cousin held onto the handlebars on the side to get to their destination. I think that people often assume that the Jewish turmoil from World War II ended with the liberation of the concentration camps. But being left with nothing, they had to experience extremely dangerous conditions years after the war. And I can't imagine how terrifying the whole experience was. My grandma eventually ended up in Munich, where she stayed for some time. There, she lived in a one-bedroom apartment with 10 to 20 other people, many of them remaining survivors in her extended family, including her brother Umek, his wife, along with some cousins. I'm told that the apartment was so crammed that some people were even forced to sleep on shelves. I imagine, though, that they still must have felt at least some sense of comfort, knowing that they could all be together again. In Munich, she learned the craft of sewing and making clothes, and she carried these talents through the rest of her life, creating things like intricate, beautiful needlepoint pictures, some of which my parents have hanging in their house to this day. And this is actually real documents from when she learned how to sew. This is a diploma from her graduating from a corset making school. And this is also on the right, a real picture from the place that she worked. She's not in this, but it is a picture from where she worked. Eventually, she decided that she wanted to immigrate to the US. In order to leave Europe, though, you had to be sponsored by an organization or individuals. After some time, my grandma was sponsored by an organization called HIAS and immigrated to Cleveland. And again, some of these are, these are all real documents from my grandma's immigration. So on the bottom, you can see that it's a long list of immigrants, and my grandma's name is where the red arrow is, along with just some other documentation of how she immigrated. My grandma's cousin, Manya, ended up moving to Chicago a few years back. And after only 2 days in Cleveland, my grandma decided to meet her cousin in Chicago, where she stayed in her apartment. Manya had another cousin from the other side of her family named Leon, who was also a Holocaust survivor. He came to America about a year later and stayed with Manya as well. Lucky for me, they fell in love and got married, and he was my grandfather. And so on the left is a picture of my grandparents on the left with Manya and her husband, along with my grandparents when they were younger and had just gotten married. Eventually, they moved into an apartment of their own in Chicago, but decided that they wanted to move to a suburb of Chicago called Skokie, where many Holocaust survivors moved as well. There, they lived a very joyous life. They had a large group of friends, all Holocaust survivors as well, who you can see pictured. My mom tells me that when she was young, my grandparents would frequently have all their friends over, and they would play cards for hours, laughing into the night. My grandparents opened Leon's Deli, where my grandma made a lot of the deli food, like tuna and salad and chopped liver. My grandparents were very, very hard workers. The deli was open 7 days a week, and to this day, people still talk about not only how delicious the food was, but how kind my grandparents were. My grandparents also had 3 children, one being my mom, who's pictured in the middle. They also had 9 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren. While my grandma passed away when I was only 13 years old, I'm so grateful for the time that I had with her. She influenced my life so much growing up and continues to influence how I live my life today. As someone who experienced so much hate in her life, she made it her mission to teach her family not to hate. Her strength and courage are traits that I carry with me, and I'm honored to be the descendant of 2 Holocaust survivors. Thank you. Oh, Gail, I think you're still muted. Gail, sorry, I think you're still muted.
Hi, everyone. Alyssa, thank you so much for gifting us with your family story. We're now going to open it up for questions. If you have a question for Alyssa, please type it into the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer it. If we don't get to your question, please email info@3gnewyork.org and we'll get back to you later on. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Did your grandmother feel any longstanding bitterness towards Germans in general as a result of her experience?
I don't think that she felt bitterness, or at least she didn't talk about it. And I think that that was her whole thing, is that she really taught us not to hate. That was so much of, she wanted us to care for everyone. And I think that she knew that holding on to hate in her heart wouldn't have changed her past, and she just wanted to make sure that her family moving forward was able to not be bitter as well. So I don't think that she did.
I will ask the next question. In case anyone missed it, the cousin Manya was my grandmother, so that's the connection. We had one person share that she wore her Take a Stand shirt today from the Holocaust Museum in Skokie. So thanks for sharing your grandmother's story. Another person asked, Alyssa, how did you get involved with this great organization?
That's a good question. It's funny, I'm actually not 100% sure how I found this. I think I found 3GNY through social media. In general, I was looking for a way to volunteer in New York. And I had tried out a few organizations, to be honest. And while all organizations are great, none of them really clicked for me. And then the second I found 3GNY, again, I think through social media, I just automatically, I felt, like I said, a sense of connection to it. And I went, there's a brunch that they do every year. And I went to that and I learned about WEDU and I did the WEDU training. And since then I've been able to go to a lot of the different events and help plan some myself. So it's been a really great experience.
Speaking more about the WEDU program, how do students respond when you share your story with them?
So I didn't know what to expect when going into this, how students would react. And, you know, you're going into middle schools and high schools, so you're nervous that they're going to interrupt or not pay attention. And really the second I start speaking, they're really drawn to the story. And I think it's, like we say, we're kind of bringing the textbook to life. And so they learned a lot about World War II. A lot of them, at least generally, have learned about World War II and the Holocaust in their classrooms. And I think being able to really understand like one horrific story really paints a picture of it. So they're very engaged when I'm speaking, and they always follow up with really thoughtful questions. So it really surprises me as watching middle schoolers and high schoolers how engaged and interested they are.
It's interesting. There's a number of people who are calling out that they have family also from Sosnowiec. So I wonder if our families know them. So we'll have to follow up with people.
Yeah.
Including there's someone here at Schwartzbaum as well that has whose parents was born in Sosnowiec. So we might have to connect. Also, our cousin Sarita, as I grew up, wants to know, how did you find those documents that you shared?
So it was a mix. We definitely had my mom had some documents from my grandma. So some of them were what we had, just what my grandma had saved. And then a few of them I was actually able to find online. I'm forgetting, it was the Arnold Archives, I think it's called. Arnold something Archives, I'm forgetting. But there's a few resources online where you can search your family name and see what comes up. And it was crazy to see some documents that my family had never seen that we were able to get.
So this next question is from WEDU volunteer Daniel Riff, who once presented his story too. Hi, Dan. And he's asking, what did you learn during your research that surprised you the most? And he said he believes your grandparents knew each other in Chicago.
Oh, I recognize the last name.
Yeah, I'm sure. I believe it. I would definitely believe it. What was the question? What was surprising?
What did you learn during your research that surprised you the most?
I think that I just had never really been able to piece the full story together. I had learned different tidbits. I knew that they lived in Chicago at some point. I knew that my grandma grew up in Sosnowiec. Like I knew a lot of these things. I don't think that there was one fact that really surprised me. It's more being able to learn the whole story together and really piece it together. It just helped me kind of have a deeper understanding of her whole experience, because I like what I said, you know, you think that the turmoil ended after the war, but when you think about all the hardships that she still had to experience years after she was liberated, I think just piecing it all together really just brought home to me. Again, I already knew how much she had to endure, but really how miraculous it was.
We have a question here. What do you know what happened to your grandmother's sister and her parents?
So her sister and her parents did not survive the war. I don't exactly know what happened to her parents. I actually just found this out this week. Like Dave always likes to say that these stories are always changing and we're always learning more and more. I just had been told by a family member that apparently someone that had survived the Holocaust had witnessed my grandma's parents and sister boarding a train, presumably to go to one of the concentration camps. And her parents actually had at one point a maid that was not Jewish before the war. And apparently at the last second, as they were all boarded on the train, her parents threw Roja, her sister, at the maid in hopes of saving her and having the maid be with her. And the Nazis had saw this and apparently shot her right then and there. And so again, that's a story that I learned this week, and very horrible that the parents witnessed that in front of their eyes. And I'm not exactly sure what happened to her parents.
We're getting a few questions about, have you gone back to visit her town in Poland?
I haven't. It's definitely on the list of things that I want to do, something that I'm talking about hopefully doing in the very near future. So I know Jason and his family has, and I heard how meaningful of an experience it was. And so I really want to.
I want to go with you. We're going
Yes,
together.
definitely.
We'll have to show you some of the places that my grandmother showed us too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely. Want to know a little bit about your grandfather? Can you tell us a little bit of his story, like obviously briefly?
Yeah. To be honest, like I said, with both my grandparents, I didn't know much of their comprehensive story. I knew little bits and pieces, and 3GNY has really allowed me to piece together my grandma's story. And I really want to do the same thing for my grandfather's story. So I know bits and pieces. I know that he was in Buchenwald, and he also was from Sosnowiec. So from the same town, he was sent to Buchenwald, and then at some point immigrated to Chicago. So I'm looking forward to being able to piece together his story a bit more as well. But it's still something that I have to do.
As a follow-up about your grandfather, from Jared Kingston, another WEDU volunteer. Hi, Jared. He's asking, did your grandfather speak about his experiences more than your grandmother?
You know, so they actually passed away very close to each other. So I was only 13 when both of them passed away. And so a lot of this, I do remember them talking about some things, but a lot of this is from like my mom and my family. From what I'm told and what I vaguely remember, my grandpa was a little bit more willing to talk about it, but neither of them like recorded themselves like for the Spielberg and for the Holocaust Museum. So none of them, or neither of them, really, like unsurprisingly, liked to talk about it. But he was a little bit more open, I think, than my grandma.
Kind of on that, a question came in what ways could you tell surviving the Holocaust affected the way your grandmother lived her day today?
I would say that there are some really, I don't want to say good traits, but I think she just really deeply cared for us. Like I think she just learned not to take things for granted, and really just cared for us and cared about the things that she did. Like she just poured love into everything and was an incredibly hard worker. And yeah, I think she just like really did not take advantage of the little things, or did not take for granted the little things, and really just instilled that on her family.
So I want to touch a little bit on the story of Alyssa and Jason. I know you guys are cousins, and 3GNY brought you together to really bond over this. So can you both talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Jason said, we knew each other growing up, but Jason's a bit older than me. So, you know,
A bit.
for so we would see each other growing up, but we didn't have a very close relationship, mostly because of our age difference. But we both knew that we both lived in New York, which I think was always a comfort. But again, we didn't always see each other when we were living here. But when I had come across 3GNY and that brunch that I had spoken about, I reached out to Jason and he told me that he was actually thinking about going to the brunch too. And so we went together, and kind of the rest is history. Now we've been able to do the WEDU training together, and we go to all the events together and are able to actually spend time together and go dinner together too outside of 3G. So it's really built our relationship, and like Jason said, it's something I'm so grateful for, because not only has this experience brought me closer to my family that's no longer with me, but also my family that's here. And so it's been a really great experience.
I mirror it exactly. And what's also really great is some of the comments that we're getting is their family, maybe you maybe know that I don't know, that's reaching out on the chat or the Q&A. They're like, we know your grandparents, we know your parents, we know UMEX granddaughters on here. Do you know Talia?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't. So hi, Talia. And the Riffs know our family, so it's great. I guess the email got out. Everyone knows to join. So,
And
so that's great.
I will add also, from like a actual research perspective, it's been really nice to be able to text Jason, like, do you know what happened, or do you know when this happened? So him and his family has also been a great resource from actually building the story.
Yeah. No, this has been great. This has been great. There's nothing else to add. Alyssa covered it. But this has been a profound, and you know what, I think Alyssa and I both, from a young age, have been very affected by our grandparents' story, especially our grandmothers. Like, well, at least my grandmother, I heard more of her story than my grandfather's. And even when I was watching, so my grandmother did film the Shoah Project, video archive. So that was a lot of first primary source that I can get for my story that I tell. And even at 17 years old, I'm in that video saying that one day I want to tell children your story too. And so I was like, so I think Alyssa and I have always felt that, I don't know if I want to say sense of responsibility, but a pride in our family and their survival, and that we shouldn't keep the story to ourselves. So it's not surprising to us, or probably to our families, that we've continued doing this work, which is not work. It's amazing, and I think we both get a lot out of talking to the children, and then the students, and then giving that feedback and asking questions and wanting to know. It brings them back, So
Yeah, definitely.
do we have time for Gail? Do we have time for more questions?
Yeah, we do. We're getting a lot more. So the next one is related to the Skokie Holocaust Museum. Someone was wondering if it was open while your grandmother was alive, and if she, got to go. And if not, do you think she would have wanted to go?
Good question. I don't quote me on this, but I think it opened after she passed away. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I do know that that my parents did give some of the documents to the Holocaust Museum. So I know that they're at least helped with the research and with the museum itself, which I think is a really great honor. And actually, in October, I'll do a little plug. In October, I believe they're doing a specific exhibit on like Jewish delis, and my grandparents' grandparents' deli is going to be featured in that exhibit as well. They really want to highlight local businesses that were in Skokie. So I'm not sure that she went, but I do know that at least that I'm glad that she's been honored there, and both my grandparents have been honored there in some way.
I definitely think that the museum was around when she was around. I don't know if she went to it, but I know I know it's around.
Yeah, that probably. Unless we
Yeah.
don't.
Oh, okay. So someone has asked if someone also has a grandmother who's a Holocaust survivor who also loved to bake and cook and from feel and taste. What are some of your favorite foods from your grandmother?
I remember two of my favorite things. One, she would make this like potato soup,
Mm,
and it was delicious. I remember that one. And then also just the deli stuff. So like I said, the tuna salad and the chopped liver were always just some of my favorite things that she made. But yeah, she was always just cooking and gefilte fish. That's another one that her gefilte fish is the family still uses her recipe, but the way that she made it was from scratch was just divine.
oh, I need to try some of that gefilte fish. My
Yes.
grandmother also made gefilte fish and chopped liver, maybe similar recipes, but they did it by taste. They didn't
Right.
the
Yeah.
recipe.
Never. Yes.
No.
Never by
Oh,
recipe.
it's great.
Just wanted to make note of the chat. Several people have mentioned there's a Facebook group for people from the Sosnowiec Bedson area. So you can, if you're interested, you can join the group. Thank you, Jeffrey, for running that group, part of it, and it's really fantastic. We had got a couple of questions going back to you speaking in schools, and what kind of questions students ask you specifically.
I think a lot of the times they ask clarifying questions. I think Dave actually pointed this out to me when I was rehearsing, that sometimes there's language that I think I'm unfortunately used to, or that I've just heard growing up, like perished or even liberated or ghettos. So there's words that I kind of forget that I would assume that the students know and they don't. So sometimes it's a bit of clarifying or trying to understand specific points in the story. And sometimes they ask very deeper questions, similar to what we're hearing today about what they think my grandma would feel about me speaking in the schools, or like what she was like when she was older. So it's surprising again to see how engaged they are and how much they really want to know, not only about her experience, but about her as a person.
Someone just asked, how are you and I related? So our grandmothers were first cousins, and I can't remember, and we probably could ask our parents, like, which family member, like, how were they cousins? Did you tell me, do you know, Alyssa, like, whose brother or whose sister? Or
I'm forgetting right now, but I do think that it's important to note that they were first cousins, but one, they lost so much of their family in the war that cousins were almost like siblings. And for them specifically, they were more like best friends. So they were cousins, but they had such a close relationship.
Yeah, they were like sisters, for sure. Oh, I already answered that question.
I have one. I like to ask a lot of speakers. If your grandmother were alive today, what would she say about all this that you're doing? How would she feel?
I think that she would be very proud of me. I think that she would be proud that I was passionate about something in general, and that I am able to teach the lessons that she taught me in, caring for other people and teaching people not to hate. I think she'd also be a little, like I said, she didn't like being recorded. She didn't like being in front of people. So she might have not been so happy about her pictures being up on the screen, but I think she'd be able to get past that and be proud and happy about the experience.
By the way, my dad just put in the chat, in the Q&A, that our grandmother's mothers were sisters. Do we have time for another one, Gail?
Yeah, we could do one more.
One question, Alyssa. What was your experience sharing your research with the rest of your family?
I think that my family, this is something that, again, like I've said that I've wanted to do for a while, and I think that my family's happy that I was able to put in the time to be able to carry on my grandparents' legacy. We've had all these tidbits, and I think just putting the story together, again, has been as meaningful for them as it's been for me. I think even for my mom specifically, it's been, again, nice is a hard word, but a nice experience to be able to dig through documents, talk to family members together. She didn't really like asking questions either. I think it was hard for her to think about her parents going through something so horrible, which I don't blame her. And so I think being able to do this together is certainly difficult, but also I think I've heard her say like, "Oh, I didn't know that," or I didn't think that happened. And so I think it's been nice to be able to have the family story and be able to carry on the legacy.
Very much.
It's a really good place to wrap up, Alyssa. Thank you so much for speaking tonight and sharing your family story. We're so grateful that you're involved. And Jason, same to you. The dynamic between your family and the story, of your relationship through 3GNY is just really special. I also want to shout out to our many 3GNY WEDU volunteer speakers. I've seen you join tonight, and the support that we all give each other is really wonderful. And, the network of 3Gs in our community is great. And also want to thank the many 2Gs, children of survivors that are our mentors and help us piece together the stories. Many of you are on tonight too, and we're just very grateful. If you hadn't yet made a gift to support our educational programs, we hope you'll consider making one now. You can refer to the chat for ways to donate. Thank you so much. If you have any connections with educators who may want our speakers like Alyssa to present in their classes, please let us know. We have many WEDU trained speakers who are ready to present just like Alyssa did. And we need schools to put them in. So the more you can help we can get, the better. We'll send an email out with the upcoming events and more information about WEDU and 3GNY. And tonight's program and the other 26 WEDU Wednesdays are available on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your evening to be with us. We're very grateful, as always, for your presence and your support. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.